There's never a dull moment when it comes to the Florida Gators. On a day in which we planned on talking strictly Florida baseball, postseason, college baseball outlook, a bombshell of a news story drops, and to help us break it all down, that and more, our good friend Neil Schulman of inallkindsofweather.com, one of the best in the business when it comes to talking all things Florida Gators. Neil, what's going on, my friend? Appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, always happy to chop it up with you. What's going on is we got a story to talk about today, Chris. It's not a very pleasant one by any means for the Gators. I was looking forward to talking Gator baseball. Was looking forward to throwing out a quick shout out to Gator softball making the supers, Gator lacrosse making the Final Four for the second time in program history. But no, we can't do that. We can't have nice things or enjoy them for very long because now we have a mess on our hands for sure. It's a mess that could be solved easily, but also could not be solved easily. And that's the problem, is the not knowing.
Yeah, it's funny enough, and Neil, to give our audience context, again, you and I planned this conversation a couple days ago and said, okay, we're going to talk about the recent bracketology that you posted, Field of 64. We're going to talk a little Gators postseason baseball, maybe some SEC postseason baseball outlook, kind of a lighthearted conversation, who would agree. And then literally, as of this morning on Tuesday, May the 21st, this story drops, and there's stories everywhere. There's articles you can go read and check out for more details. Highly encourage you guys to go over to inallkindsofweather.com, because Neil, you wrote an article on this, and the title is such: Jaden Rashada sues Billy Napier, Marcus Castro Walker, Hugh Hathcock, the story that just won't die. And again, we've been getting more and more details on this. John Talty at J Talty on X said, breaking: Georgia quarterback Jaden Rashada suing Florida head coach Billy Napier and the top Gators booster Hugh Hathcock for fraud, among other allegations, over failed $13.85 million NIL deal. Pete Nakos with On 3. He also posted about, in the complaint filed today by Jaden Rashada, Billy Napier allegedly promised $1 million if the quarterback signed with Florida on National Signing Day. Filing states Rashada never received that payment or the $13.85 million contract he signed. Neil, bring us up to speed with where this came from. Is this something that, did you expect this to happen? Had you heard this was a possibility? And just the details of this, and just how big of a deal is this for Billy Napier and Florida football?
Well, so I had an idea that it was coming. Various people I talked to close to the program, the situation, obviously have different opinions. They're in different positions, so they can say different things because their ideas are, and their hopes, I guess, are different based on what they do. But I mean, there's some people I talked to that were not worried at all. I thought, this will be nothing and it'll just blow over. And some of them are kind of still saying that, yeah, they're just looking for the bag. They're looking to settle, whatever. Other people I talked to were very worried. They said, this is something that we could see coming, and just connecting dots and adding 2 + 2 together and getting 4. You saw that December 7th was the date in which Eddie Rojas terminated the agreement for Jaden Rashada to sign with the University of Florida for the amount of $13.85 million. And then he signs with Florida anyway, and then he doesn't. Now, if I knew nothing and I talked to nobody, I would think that is a case of somebody in the UF offices or related to UF in some capacity promising the kid or his father that there's going to be a comparable amount of money coming your way should you sign with the Florida Gators, because there's no way you have an agreement for $13.85 million, lose that agreement, watch it just go up in flames, and then sign with that same school anyway, unless there was some other form of an agreement, whether it be legally binding or there be a handshake agreement or what have you, some other form of agreement that tells you and your father that a similar amount of money is going to come your way. So that, to me, right there reeked of foul play. On top of the fact, there was the fact that other people close to the situation at UF were saying, this isn't going to go away as easy as you think. Yeah, he's at Arizona State, whatever. He's going to play or maybe not play, but we're all going to see he's going to be worth a lot less than that $13.85 million contract made him seem to be, but this isn't going to go away so easily. And now we're seeing that day of reckoning coming. Florida is, of course, being sued, or not Florida directly, but Billy Napier, a handful of people connected with the Gator program, as you mentioned, Marcus Castro-Walker, who has since been relieved of his duties within the Florida program, and Florida mega booster Hugh Hathcock, who, if you don't know who that is basically a less bombastic version of Miami's John Ruiz. Not a good situation for Florida by any means. One that you could have seen coming if you just looked at things logically a few months ago, but now there's no denying this is a problem.
So, Neil, when you look at this situation, I mean, is this something where, I've seen people speculating on social media, and again, I think maybe some grasping for straws about the way that it could affect Billy Napier's future in Gainesville? I mean, is that too much of a stretch to say that this thing could get sideways to a point where, Florida is kind of finding that we can now fire with cause and there's no bias? Like, is that a silly conversation to have, or is that something where you think this thing could evolve and snowball to a point where we get to a point of that type of thing happening?
So to me, it depends on exactly what the Rashada camp endgame is here. Do they just want a settlement to try to recoup some of the money, or are they interested in going to court and fighting each and every one of these charges? And if you have not read the lawsuit, you're in for whatever the exact opposite of a treat is, because there are so many bad words in that lawsuit from a legal perspective: fraudulent misrepresentation, fraudulent inducement, aiding and abetting fraud, civil conspiracy to commit fraud, negligent misrepresentations, tortious interference, aiding and abetting tortious interference, and vicarious liability. There are so many charges in there that are terrifying if the Rashada camp is interested in fighting each and every one of those charges tooth and nail. Now, if they're not, if they're just in it for a settlement so that they can recoup some of that money that they didn't get, Florida will probably be more than happy to sit down, settle with them at a negotiation table, never let this get to the courts. But again, if the Rashada camp can prove each and every one of these things, that they can get a court of law to agree with them that Florida is guilty of even half of these charges, then I think you are looking at a situation where Napier could be fired with cause, where you don't owe him that buyout, because that's a situation where, if you remember, almost a decade ago, crazy to think it's been 7 years, but Jim McElwain had decent results on the field, but he embarrassed the university by painting the fan base as bloodthirsty lunatics who scream for heads on sticks at the first sign of adversity. That's not a good look for a head coach to do that. This isn't a good look for a head coach to do that, to do what Napier is alleged to have done. But again, that hinges on how serious is the Rashada camp in getting a court of law to make it a legally agreed upon fact that Napier is guilty of all these things, or are they just chasing the settlement back? Because if that's what they're doing, then I see this getting settled and Napier keeping his job, at least long enough to see the season through.
Neil, as someone that admittedly did not follow every single in and out of this Jaden Rashada thing and the way it fell apart with the NIL stuff, I ask you simply this: whose fault is this? Is this Napier's fault? Is this the collective? Is it a collection of people? Like, when you look at this entire Jaden Rashada situation, like, who do you put the majority of the blame on here?
I mean, I think it is a collaborative effect here. It's definitely not on the collective and Eddie Rojas. I think, if anything, they were being the good guys here. They reached out and they destroyed the contract. They torched it back in December. Signing day was 6-7 weeks later. That gave him time to go and find another place to play. Now, how much money he was going to be worth at any other school is a different conversation, but he and his camp would have had time to go and chase some semi-congruent offer elsewhere. So it's not on Eddie Rojas. It's not on the collective by any means, beyond the mere fact that a contract was promised and Eddie Rojas pulled the plug on it, to which the obvious counter is, well, the contract stated that he could do that The contract gave either party the right to terminate it whenever the hell they wanted. So Eddie Rojas just did what he was legally allowed to do. And in that case, you can't logically put any blame on him. Now, Harlan Rashada and Jaden Rashada and the Rashada camp as a whole could have seen that termination of the contract as a warning sign. Hey, you're just not worth $13.85 million. You're just not worth it. You're not going to get that anywhere else. It was foolish of Florida to even offer that in the first place, but you're just not going to get that anywhere. So maybe see if Miami will be willing to take you back for, I think it was $9.5 million. Maybe see if another school out west, like an Arizona State, for example, or a Cal or a UCLA or an Arizona or Texas or something like that, they'll be willing to give you a $7.5, $8 million deal, which, by the way, is still a lot of money. So, you have time to go and field those offers, but instead they chose to stay committed to Florida throughout the duration of time between when that contract was burned on December 7th and National Signing Day a month and a half later. So in that aspect, it's on the Rashadas for not being smart about it, realizing what's realistic and what's not, and discerning what exactly the kid's worth is, and sticking with a commitment despite there being no legally binding agreement that guarantees the kid a penny. So in that case, it is on the Rashadas. But then again, Florida, and this goes back to, is the lawsuit going to be proven true? Is all of this stuff that we're hearing about going to be proven to be fact? If that's true, then it's very much on Napier's shoulders. And it goes back to what we were saying a minute ago about having cause to fire him. Because if Napier and Marcus Castro Walker did indeed promise the kid money with a handshake agreement or a gentleman's agreement or something that's not going to be legally enforceable in a court of law, well, then that's kind of a less than ethical thing to do on their part, because then you have the aspect of, well, that's a lie and you lied to a kid and now you owe him money. So I say it's a small part on the Rashadas. It's a larger part on Florida, assuming that the lawsuit allegations are even somewhat true. And I know it's the sexy thing to do to blame Georgia and Kirby Smart because everyone hates them, but this lawsuit was coming way before he ever stepped foot on Georgia. So Kirby may have helped them press on the gas pedal, but that's, if anything, he just gave them the green light when they were 99% of the way to the finish line anyway.
Neil, hearing you talk about the figures and the numbers, and I understand there's a lot of value in having a quote unquote franchise quarterback or the face of the franchise or having that dude in the center. These numbers are crazy. I mean, to think that any kid in high school would be getting promised $7, $8, $10, $13 million when he hasn't taken a snap on a college campus is wild to think. And I think it only reinforces, this is the wild, wild west of NIL and the portal. And obviously, again, we're doing this thing with absolutely no guardrails. There's no rules in sight. Let's say, and I want to get your take on what you think is going to happen in a moment, but let's just say hypothetically, a settlement happens, this gets over and done with. What do you think? And I know it's hard for you to, speak for Florida necessarily, but what's the lesson learned here? How will Florida, do you think, act and move differently in the future when it comes to NIL? Because I'd have to imagine this is going to be a pretty major learning experience for Billy Napier. I know, again, you mentioned the collective was being the good guys, but this is a learning experience for everybody affiliated with Florida football.
Yeah, I think the lesson is don't promise what you can't deliver as an obvious one. And the second lesson is nobody is worth $13.85 million. DJ Lagway, who, by the way, is a great kid with a great family and I think happens to be exponentially more talented than Jaden Rashada, he's not worth that level of money. So the momentary satisfaction that you got from flipping the kid away from Miami and sticking it to John Ruiz and sticking your tongue out and wiggling your ears and going, ha, 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 we beat you, is not worth the headache that comes down the road. And I think that's a larger lesson that, we can all probably learn in life is don't trade your end goal. Don't trade what you want later for the instant gratification that you want right now, because the ends do not justify the means 99 times out of 100. And as we see now, not only do the ends not justify the means, but it lands you in a world of trouble, even if this does get settled and this never goes to a courtroom. if Napier doesn't get fired for cause and Scott Strickland, the AD, doesn't get fired and all that, even if none of that happens, the headache that this is worth is just not worth what Florida went through for that. What was it? The month, the 2.5 months of being able to say that we flipped Jaden Rashada away from Miami. No, because we're now going on a 1.5 years of this mess, building and building and building to this moment. And like I said, again, even if it gets settled, it's painting Florida in a bad light, and they don't want that.
Neil, what does your gut tell you how this will resolve itself? I've seen some others in the Florida camp that they don't think it's all that big of a deal, that it'll get settled. There'll be some sort of settlement, and this will be done quickly. Do you get that same feeling, or do you fear that there may be more to it?
Well, I mean, again, I don't know how serious the Rashadas are about collecting every single dollar that was owed to Jaden in that contract that was worth $13.85 million. It's very possible that the Rashadas are just in this for a settlement. They're in this for the quick bag to try to recoup some of that. And gun to my head, I'm forced to make a call. I think it does get settled. But again, Harlan Rashada is kind of a snake. He's a little vindictive. So, and I get it. Like, I understand there was a contract promised. The contract, like I will say again, very clearly stated that either side could back out at any time. But again, there was a contract promised to his son. That contract, legally or not, was not honored. So I understand him wanting to recoup every penny of that. But I also think that it's going to be quite a headache for them, and it's going to drag down the kid while he – I mean, again, this goes back to how serious you are about the kid's playing career too. Like, if you want him to be an NFL quarterback one day, which is why everyone goes to play college football, then you probably don't want the lawsuit of your son suing an opposing coach hanging over your head as you go through practice drills and two-a-days and even games in the fall. So it really depends what their end game is. I think that Harlan isn't that stupid that he's willing to bring down his own son just to bring down Napier in Florida. But I don't know. I guess we'll have to wait and see. Like I said, though, if I'm forced to make a prediction, I do think it gets settled, and I do think it's ultimately not a big deal. But the fact remains that Florida put itself in a position where there is a non-0% chance that this could be something more than just a settlement. So at this point, we're just hoping and praying that the mutually assured destruction principle doesn't get employed here, because if it does, it's not going to go well.